Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here. Today I wanted to talk about a very specific problem that can occur with SX-70 cameras, and that is misaligned RAM switches. Now, these switches are labeled in the official repair manual, I think as S3 and S5. One of the things you'll see when I do these repair videos is I don't use the official names of those switches because they simply aren't helpful. There's something like, I think, 8 switches off the top of my head that Polaroid have labeled like S1 through to S8. Truthfully, I don't remember because I never use those official names. They're not particularly helpful because it doesn't describe where that switch is. So, for example, let's talk about the shutter button. That makes up a switch, and it has its own designated number, which I have refused to memorize because I would much rather if someone have a problem with their camera and they say, Jake, what's the deal? My, S2 switch isn't working. I would much rather them come to me and say, hey, the shutter button switch isn't working. Or the rear hinge switch. Or the rear RAM switch. Or the front RAM switch. Or the door switch. I much prefer to use terms that are descriptive instead of just arbitrary letters and numbers, because it tells you straight away where the problem might be in the camera. So when I say that these are front and rear, or anterior and posterior, if you want to get anatomical about it, when I say that they are RAM switches, that is because there is a spring-loaded sliding RAM that travels backwards and forwards within the gear train that contacts those switches at various points, and those switches send signals to the PCB telling it when to fire the shutter and when to turn the motor and that kind of thing. And those switches are able to be adjusted. You can move them backwards and forwards. And sometimes, because of the way that they are shaped, they are basically sort of 2 metallic prongs that when the RAM contacts them will either touch or open. That's pretty much how they work. If you're working on one of these things, you'll soon see exactly what I mean by the time you get up close and personal with one. But yeah, there's basically 2 little plastic pieces that are on these 2 metallic switches, which will either be open or closed, depending on the position of where the RAM is at, depending on at what part of the cycle the gear train is at, so whether the mirror is up or down. Now, when those switches become misaligned, the camera will behave very, very strangely. So, this is a camera that belonged to a client of mine. Someone 100% guaranteed has been in here dicking around with it in the past without knowing what they're doing. And I've spent the last hour or so just fixing everything that they did wrong. This is a problem that was present on the camera originally, but I had to fix everything else before I could even get to those switches. And it goes without saying, if you are watching this video after the part about just how to adjust the switches, you're doing things wrong. I'm going to explain it, but while the camera is stripped down to this point, it is very worth opening the bellows assembly, cleaning the Fresnel, cleaning the screen, lubricating everything. Do not just focus on the switches, get the camera quote-unquote working and call it a day. If these things are worth refurbishing, it's worth spending the extra time doing all the other bits and pieces. So if you come to me after this video, after watching it going, oh Jake, I adjusted the switches and it still doesn't work, and I say, well, did you overhaul the rest of the camera too? And you say, well, no, I didn't. I'm going to tell you exactly where you can go, okay? But in terms of those switches, let's see exactly what the problem is. So what I'm going to do here is just put the door back on the camera, like so, and I'm going to insert a pack of film, and we'll see what happens. Now, you can hear how the motor is constantly running. Note how you can hear the mirror slapping up inside and you can hear the click of the pick arm. That is a very different problem to when the drive shaft becomes connected. When the drive shaft becomes connected, you'll hear the motor whirring, but you won't hear any of the other mechanical noises and you won't see any of the gears move. In this case, the motor wants to turn, but it doesn't stop. And the reason that the motor is continuously turning is that one of the switches isn't being engaged. From memory, this symptom is symptomatic of the rear switch not getting engaged. So, effectively what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure I'm going to manually, by hand, move the cogs until the mirror is in its downwards position, and then we're going to check things with the multimeter. So, I've done videos on how to do this in the past. By the way, it goes without saying, if you want to figure out how to strip the camera down to this level, I've done other videos on that in the past. If you are after a guide on how to service the camera, please see my other videos. This is about a very specific problem. I know that goes without saying, but I get the occasional comment on my video saying, oh, I can't see what you're doing, or you didn't show this part. Yeah, that's because I've got other videos that cover this, that go for like 2 hours. This is about a very specific problem. So, basically what I'm doing, I'm just manually cycling the gears until we hear the click of the pick arm. Then I know that the mirror is down. Let's just check on the mirror, see how that's doing. Takes a while. But when the mirror is down and the pick arm is in its resting position, there we go. Basically those two switches should be closed. So, I have a multimeter here on continuity mode. Beep means continuous. And this rear switch is not engaged, nor is the front switch. And I believe that's because someone's been playing around with the insides of this and they've actually physically gone and misaligned both switches. Either that or there is some crazy corrosion in here. Now there's a few ways that you can sort this out. The best way is to physically remove the entire switch, basically desolder them and adjust them so that they are making contact and making sure that they're clean. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I am going to desolder both front and rear. Now these switches work exactly the same, whether it's an Alpha or whether it is a Sonar or whether it's a Model 1 camera, they work identically. And there's a few ways that you can adjust these switches. As I said, they are actually adjustable. The screws that hold them in, you can actually loosen those screws and physically slide the switch around backwards and forwards. But it kind of has, like, when the ribbon cables sit nice and flush, that's really the position that they're supposed to sit in. Sliding them backwards and forwards kind of bends the cable and it moves into a position that it wasn't sort of designed to be in from the factory. It is certainly a way to get it working, but it's much better to take the switch off, clean it out, make sure that it's not dirty or not corroded in there, and make sure that, you know, everything's working properly. Sometimes if the switches are broken, I might need to replace them entirely with some from a spare camera. So let's just pull off the ribbon cables. There we go. Now, I've only loosely soldered the shutter on, so please don't judge me on the dodgy looking solder. I will go and neaten that up later, but I am at the stage of testing the cycle of the body at the moment. So that is what the switch looks like inside. There's two metal posts, and basically they should be very, very straight, very perpendicular. Sorry, not perpendicular. They should be parallel to one another. And I can see that this one has just been bent over time. So I'm physically just going to straighten them. You want the switch to be like close, but not touching. So that when the RAM slides backwards, it's going to hit the two contacts and those two are going to make a connection. And one thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab some sandpaper, just some very, very fine, wet and dry, like metal sandpaper. And I don't think I need to do this, but it's a good idea. Just in case there's corrosion on the brass. I like to just give it a little once over with a piece of sandpaper, just so that we can be sure that when that RAM switch engages, that it's guaranteed to make a contact. All right, so it's a lot straighter now. And like I said, I'm very confident, like, although this can happen, like theoretically, this is the kind of thing that could happen if, like, the camera was left for a long time mid-cycle. It might put stress on the springs. But I believe in this case it's because someone was mucking around with the insides. Because like I said, I've already had to, with this particular camera, repair quite a lot of very questionable questionable repair decisions. And this is something where if you are not prepared to figure this thing, like to figure things out and do things properly, you can end up in a lot of trouble, wondering why your camera isn't working. So I'm just moving the switch so that the contacts go in place, and now we can do the same but with the front switch. And I'm going to assume that this is also going to be pretty mangled. Funnily enough, someone actually emailed me about this very topic just the other day, so thank you for the suggestion. I actually think that I've covered this topic before, but just in amongst one of my other much more long-form repair videos. Yeah, same story. These two are very, very bent out of shape. In this case, yeah, like these switches should, like this switch, the front switch, should actually stay closed at all times, and it was stuck in the open position. So that's why it wasn't working. So the front switch is open and gets closed when the RAM is back. The front switch is the opposite. And the net effect is when the RAM moves, both switches do the same thing. They're either both on or both off. Both on, both off, depending on if the RAM is backwards or forwards. The only camera that this varies is the SLR-690, the Japanese-made piece of garbage, because the Japanese engineers decided, for whatever reason, in their horrible MDC03 transistor-based NEC 4-bit microcomputer monstrosity, that the switches needed to change order for some reason. So on the 690, it's on, off, off, on, off, off, on. This one is the same. 1100, on, off, off. But yeah, I'm just going to sand this one too. But yeah, very, very unusual that both switches on this camera needed adjusting. Generally, you only find one, and it's, you know, usually because the camera's taken a knock or it's been moved or something like that. So I can only make the assumption that based on the fact that this camera arrived to me without its leather on, with a few screws missing, that someone had been inside playing around with things and broke things and didn't know how to put it back together again. These switches are also described in the official repair manual as well, although I can understand if you have a hard time figuring that out, because it's, well, it's a very technical and hard to understand document. Alright, so I'm just sliding that other switch in. I'm going to put the little screw in place. And like I said, you can adjust these backwards and forwards, but the way the ribbon cable sits, it's only, the switch is kind of just meant to sit in a fixed position. Like, I know it's adjustable, but you shouldn't have to rely on adjusting it. You should just be able to alter the little metal prongs, and that's the much better way of doing it. So I have the ribbon cable back on and in place over here. Okay. Now we can resolder things, and before I give it a test with film, I will test it with the multimeter. I have a fan on, if you're wondering why my solder fumes are blowing away, and that is because it is ridiculously hot today. It is the revenge of the Australian summer. Despite it being late March, it's never usually hot this time of year. Isn't climate change wonderful? Alright, so now, and everything should be intact. So now let's turn the multimeter back on to continuity mode. Just make sure my multimeter is starting to die. So beep and beep. So this should work now. Great. Now that has worked. There's only one problem. We didn't hear the click. And that's because the rear switch is adjusted so that it's engaging a little too early now. Basically what I need to do is just adjust it a little bit, and I'm just going to do that with some very thin pliers. I just need to move the plastic bit a little bit. That should do the trick. There we go. And that's fixed. So now we should be able to fire the shutter, and everything is working as expected. So with the door closed, as I said before, on continuity mode, if I can get my multimeter to work. Yeah, the continuity is actually not great on the unit, but it does work. On, with the door closed, and if I manually turn the gears, mirror is now up, RAM has come forwards, we should have off and off. So no beep, and no beep. Now that is how it's done. Like I said, it's a very specific problem, and it's different to the way that the motor usually whirs, because quite often when the motor is just whirring away on its own, it's because the drive shaft coupler has snapped. This is actually an SX-70 Alpha. They don't even have a plastic drive shaft coupler. So if you can physically feel the camera, you know, the mirror's going up, you can hear the clicking, you can see the cogs moving, and it just keeps cycling, it is because these hinge switches are faulty. They're either become mangled or corroded, or they are simply in the wrong position, and they need to be adjusted. Now it can also happen that when we follow these traces where the RAM switches are, when we follow them along the ribbon cable and to the PCB, the traces go into the main logic chip on the PCB. Let's see, do I have a spare PCB? Here we go, I've got one right in front of me here. So this logic chip here, right? Sometimes when the traces come in from the ribbon cable, they go from these connections and then they travel down and into the actual chip itself. Sometimes the logic chip, where it interprets those switch signals, can actually be faulty. This happened to me the other day on a client's camera, and it's part of the reason that I don't like using the 50-year-old PCBs anymore. These days, I really opt for the SX-70R solution. I just don't offer this as a solution at the current time that I'm making this video. Even though I can 600 modify these boards, I much prefer to replace the circuits with brand new electronic ones, the SX-70R, because not only they give you more features, but they're a lot more reliable. And I actually had it the other day where a client's camera started to malfunction with that same hinge switch problem, but it wasn't the hinge switch, that was fine. It wasn't the ribbon cable, that was fine. It was actually internally inside the chip. So there you go. But yes, that's cycling over and over and over again. It is to do with the RAM switch and the way that it travels and engages when the mirror is up and down at various parts of the cycle. Hopefully you guys understood most of that. Like I said, this is a bit more of an advanced repair for people that have already dived into the guts of these things. I will emphasize again, please do not do like half-baked as needed repairs and go, oh, that's the problem, I'll just repair those switches, the rest of it looks pretty clean. No! Do it properly, for crying out loud. And if you do attempt this, unless you have overhauled everything else, do not come crawling to me asking for me to help troubleshoot unless you do everything properly. So follow my other guides. Do not do a half-assed attempt. I still have a lot more work to do to this camera. Yes, I've got it quote-unquote working, but I'm still going to service the motor. I'm going to lubricate all the gear train because, you know, that's 50 years old and super dry. I have to resolder all these connections, and I still have to do the shutter and PCB. But I couldn't do any of those things until I got the body of this thing working. Alright, finished results, guys. Completely overhauled. I did the shutter, it is 600 converted, I've rebuilt the motor, and of course, before it went back to the client, I have film tested it. Indoors, with flash, and of course outdoors in bright sun. Everything is working as one would expect. And yeah, I'm very happy to now send this back. It will be going back without leather. The client has specifically requested I send it back without any skin because they already have some that they're going to use. Otherwise, I would be showing it to you fully reskinned. And that basically does it for today's video. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to like, subscribe, send a donation if you like what I do in terms of the channel. Or simply send something in to be serviced. I will see you guys in the next video, and have a wonderful day.